All right. Well, welcome everybody to our Plantuary Ask the Experts. We are so very excited to have you here today. My name is Aubrey Red, and I am a senior culinary dietitian with the nonprofit Unite for Her. And today we are joined by the American Institute of Cancer Research Senior Nutrition Advisor, Karen Collins, to answer your questions about nutrition and cancer and what current research says about food and its impact on health. So we're so excited to be able to bring this Ask the Experts to you today. Of course, all of our digital education would not be possible without our sponsors. So I just wanted to take a moment quickly to highlight our sponsors. So our digital education events are presented by West and Merck, with additional support from Daiichi Sankyo and GSK. So just a moment of thank you to our sponsors for today. So I'm very excited for some of our additional educational events we have happening as well this month and next month. I wanted to bring those to your attention too. We have our virtual hangout on Wednesday, February 7th at 5 p.m. We'll be focusing on the hot topic treatment-related menopause. This is a follow-up to our speaker segment, which we hosted last fall. Watch out for it in our Her Library. And we'll be hanging out once again with Dr. Singh to answer your common questions about treatment-related menopause and associated side effects. Then the next day, on Thursday, February 8th, we'll have our Her Speaker series at 6 p.m. Eastern. So in observance of Black History Month, we'll be focusing on mental health in the Black community. We'll be joined by a panel of 3 mental health experts who would be discussing the importance of focusing on mental health, plus the obstacles the Black community experiences, as well as the 2 specific types of therapy, ecotherapy and EMDR, both of which are available to our Passport community. Both events are hosted via Zoom. You can sign up at uniteforher.org, and all of our past virtual events are on our Her Library as well. So with today's event, just a reminder and some housekeeping, we are streaming live on Facebook. The recording will be available on our Her Library as well. And those who are watching live, you are welcome to join into the conversation. Please engage with us in the chat. Make sure you ask your questions live too as well. We have a great list of questions for today. We're going to get through as many as we can. So with that, I do want to introduce once again Karen Collins. Karen is a registered dietitian nutritionist who serves as senior nutrition advisor to the American Institute for Cancer Research. Karen focuses on translating nutrition research to people, cut through information overload, and develop realistic strategies for health. She has served on an NIH panel focused on nutrition and cancer survivorship and authored multiple peer-reviewed book chapters and research summaries for health professionals covering cancer prevention recommendations and their intersection with heart health. Karen's also penned over 2,000 nutrition-related articles for the public. She writes for the AICR blog, and she also reviews Putting Nutrition Research into Perspective for her own website, KarenCollinsNutrition.com. So welcome, Karen. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here with you.
All right, and let's dive in. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of wonderful questions. So as we know, today is our Plantuary themed Ask the Experts. So we want to help encourage eat everyone more plants. So with that, let's start out with our first question. What does the recommendation for a plant-based or a plant-forward diet really mean?
This is really a confusing term, isn't it? Because we hear plant-based, and yet people using the term may mean very different things when they say it. When it comes to the recommendations related to cancer risk and cancer survivorship, it's really important to note that generally in the fine print, it's actually a mostly plant-based diet, or they might say, as you said, Aubrey, a plant-forward diet, because it means that a dietary pattern would be mostly plant foods, and that could be a diet that's all plant foods, like a vegan diet. It could be a vegetarian diet, but it could be a diet that does include some animal products, including even meat, and what is sometimes called a flexitarian diet. As long as the plant foods, the whole grains, Vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, pulses, beans are the majority of the plate, and that's the key point.
Great. And so we're still going to get those benefits from the plant foods, even if we do choose to consume some animal products in our diet?
Yes, we absolutely do. It's been
Wonderful.
shown very clearly in research that it's that plant-focused, plant-forward dietary pattern as long as it's implemented with healthy choices.
Absolutely. And the dietitian team here at Unite for Her, we're of course here to help you make some of those healthy choices. And so with those plant foods, I know you mentioned quite a few when you were kind of going through them. Particularly, I think a lot of us focus and start to think about fruits and vegetables. And we always hear, eat more fruits and vegetables. What's a realistic goal that makes a difference for health? Is there a kind of goal number or servings to achieve?
Well, this is where it can get kind of overwhelming for people because they get the impression that that to benefit requires, massive amounts that just almost seems out of reach. And so a really important point to understand is that what the research shows is the biggest difference in overall health and in cancer risk is between people who consume at least 5 servings a day, 5 like 1/2 cup servings a day compared to people who eat very little. And unfortunately, there are a lot of Americans today who still eat, much less than that. That's the big leap. Then for overall health, it's not actually clear how much more benefit in terms of cancer risk, specifically changes. But for overall health, then once you're there at those 5 small servings a day, then if you can try to aim for 2 to 4 cups of vegetables and 1.5 to 2.5 cups of fruit, then that's great. But the important thing is to not, if you're setting your sight too high, sometimes you can get so overwhelmed that it's hard to even get going. And so I think really starting with the idea of just include some vegetable or fruit in every meal. Like that's the baseline. And then start adding a little bit larger portions, adding in an extra one, swapping more vegetables or fruits for a smaller portion of something else on the plate, and including fruit or vegetables in snack. And surprisingly, all of a sudden, when you look at it one step at a time, you really can reach some of those targets that at first, might have seemed really daunting.
Yeah. And I think, I feel like I am always encouraging folks to take it that little small step at a time. I think we can, even with resolutions, we can get into that mindset of on Monday, I have to throw everything in the pantry away and start fresh. But it's really about small additions that makes the
Absolutely.
biggest impact.
Yes, yes.
Awesome.
And just looking at the swaps that you can make to both increase the amount and think about the variety of choices. For many of us, we let ourselves get stuck in kind of a little rut and have maybe 3 or 4 vegetables that we alternate. Well, first of all, of course, you don't feel like eating more vegetables if it's, if you're that limited, it's pretty boring. But also to get the whole range of nutrients and protective phytochemicals that are found in fruits and vegetables, the greater the variety, the more of those you're going to have a chance to include in your dietary pattern.
Amazing. Yeah. All those colors, they always say eat the rainbow. So, I think it really rides home with that
It
too.
does, as long as you remember that white is a color too. It might not be in the rainbow, but there are plenty of white foods that have valuable nutrients. And so that's the only thing about the rainbow is don't let it shortchange the white in the beige foods.
A great point. A great point. And I know you touched on with all of the different plant foods, you're going to get a lot of different phytochemicals. And so, thinking about the different compounds that are in our plant foods, I wanted to bring in, and see if we can put the claims that folks may see about harmful effects of some plant foods and compounds in context. So, warnings about lectins, gluten, phytates, soy isoflavones, things of that nature. Could you speak on that a little bit?
Sure. A lot of those, as a summation point to think about when you see claims like this, is they're looking at how these compounds behave in isolated settings in a laboratory. And our bodies are not a laboratory, our bodies are much more than what you get from an isolated cell. So you really have to take in context how all the different ramifications of a compound and all the other, how it affects insulin and hormones and inflammation and things like that. So that's where I think a lot of the misunderstandings come from. To dig in more specifically, there's claims that lectins, which are something you might encounter in whole grains, and it gets a lot of feedback on fear of whole grains, is that they're somehow pro-inflammatory. But that was based on rodent studies with really high doses and in an uncooked form of lectin. We only eat lectins when they're in foods that are cooked, and the proper cooking inactivates those lectins and reduces the amount. So just wipe that fear off your mind. Gluten certainly is a concern for people who have celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Some individuals may report a sensitivity to gluten during chemotherapy if the wall of their intestinal tract has become maybe a bit weaker as a barrier. But even if you experience that, that doesn't mean that you have one of these long-term conditions. And as the gut heals, you should be fully able to, go back to including gluten. The problem with avoiding gluten, it's not an essential nutrient, but so many of the whole grain products do contain gluten. So you start really limiting yourself. And many of the gluten-free choices that people have, then they end up using a refined grain product that's really less nutritious, and they've skipped the gluten for no reason. Third one I think you said was phytates. Phytates also in whole grains, sometimes they're called anti-nutrients. And it's true that they can decrease the absorption of iron, for example, but that can be overcome if you're eating it with vitamin C containing fruits and vegetables. So that you've already avoided that. And in fact, evidence suggests that phytates may have cancer protective effects on influencing on cell signaling and supporting antioxidant and anti-inflammatory defenses. So again, avoiding it for no reason.
Thank
So should we
you.
tackle the soy? That's always the big
Yes.
one, right?
I was gonna say, and that is a lot of questions that we get from our community and a lot of questions that came in today, particularly we're on soy, thinking about phytoestrogens and estrogen receptor positive cancers like breast cancers. So could you speak on, soy and its maybe health benefits or some claims that people are concerned about?
Sure. Yes, let's start off with that conception of phytoestrogen and what that really is. It is not talking about an estrogen effect in the body. It is when the researcher that coined that term has actually said he wishes he had never done that because it's created so much confusion. He was noting that the chemical structure of some of these compounds, like the isoflavones in soy foods, resemble somewhat human estrogen. But the early studies that suggested this might pose a risk, for example, for breast cancer, were done in cells and in rodents. Rodents metabolize isoflavones completely different than humans do. And it referred to much higher doses. And at the time, we didn't have other studies. Now we have both long-term studies following people who have consumed soy foods and clinical studies where we're in randomized trials looking more closely at people. And we can say very clearly that soy food consumption is not associated with increased cancer risk, including no increased risk of breast cancer. And when it comes to breast cancer survivors, the latest report pulling together all the best evidence from around the world, the AICR WCRF Cup Global Report on Breast Cancer Survivorship, which was released in 2022, found that soy food intake may lower risk of all-cause mortality, death from all causes among breast cancer survivors. It's not clear whether it also may lower risk of death specifically from breast cancer or breast cancer recurrence. There was no evidence that it increased it. It's just not clear whether it decreased it. There are some studies that show it may improve even breast cancer recurrence. And when it was analyzed separately by people with estrogen receptor positive and estrogen receptor negative breast cancer, including those women who were taking tamoxifen, the findings were the same, associated with lower deaths from all causes.
That's great. And I feel like that research really helps resound that message as these plant compounds are going to be so nutritive and helpful. You mentioned, that all cause mortality being decreased, so safely incorporating whole soy foods into a typical day is something that can really boost our overall health.
Absolutely, yes. Plenty of protective phytocompounds, dietary fiber. It's a good source of dietary protein. And in fact, for people who want to read more, I think we can link to a review of the research that's on my website looking at soy and breast cancer. And the American Institute for Cancer Research, AICR, has a whole section of the website about foods and their relationship to cancer risk. And one of the specific entries is about soy. So if you need to sort of read and digest it or show it to somebody, those would be two places that you might want to check.
Amazing. And we will put those links in the chat on Facebook. So make sure that you stay tuned and you grab those links as well. I wanted to circle back. I know you were talking about some of the different compounds and particularly speaking to inflammation. So I think inflammation is something we get a lot of questions on, especially on these prolonged treatments and things of that nature. And a lot of folks will lean on herbal remedies, be it turmeric or things of that nature, adding herbs and spices to food. So can you speak at all on the antioxidants or the anti-inflammatory properties to some of our herbs and spices?
Well, that is a great idea, and I love having people include more herbs and spices in their diet. Not for sure because it has any specific anti-inflammatory or cancer protective effect. When a lot of these compounds are studied, they actually pull them in quite a high dose. And for virtually everything, whether protective or risk, dose matters. So you can look at something in a very high amount and see a risk or see a benefit, but then in the small amount that we get in our diet, you may not have that effect. The reason I love to have people use herbs and spices is, first of all, you may, through these little bits all through the day, have these benefits start adding up. And it's a terrific way to make healthy food taste delicious. So often people are concerned that, oh, healthy eating is, it has no flavor, or they think it's boring or something. When you start playing around with herbs and spices, that food is delicious. And I think it's fear of, if you're not used to using that, just jump right in, dip your toe in and use those. Stepping back a little bit from to your question, what is an anti-inflammatory diet? It's a lot more than just adding turmeric to something or other at night. It's the whole dietary pattern that makes a diet anti-inflammatory. You can't fix it by, just dumping turmeric or any other single spice on an unhealthy diet. What we know is that when a diet is predominantly plants, as we talked about, lots of whole grains, vegetables, fruits, soy foods and pulses, dried beans and peas, healthy fats, all of this together contributes to a dietary pattern that can lower markers of inflammation. And it's that whole dietary pattern that is the key rather than fixating on one specific food or supplement.
I think that that's a great point to make. It's really it's the bigger picture when we're thinking about all of it.
Yeah, there's just really no evidence to get yourself all, focused on one thing. Just kind of settle back and look at that overall pattern. And the closer you can get to what's called high dietary quality, which is measured by including more of these protective foods and limiting high intake of foods that aren't so healthy, that is associated with lower markers of inflammation.
Great. And I know you mentioned you kind of just tapped into, you said, foods that aren't so healthy. I think sometimes we associate maybe an unhealthy quote unquote food with something that's more of an ultra processed food. So on that, I wanted to pull in a conversation. There's a lot of news about ultra processed foods versus processed foods. Is it best to avoid them all? What's your advice on ultra processed and processed foods?
Well, first of all, understand that most foods undergo some form of processing before we consume them. The point is that some foods are very highly processed in ways that increase calories and reduce nutrients. And so foods that are sort of, we would call them moderately processed, it would include things like canned beans or canned vegetables or fruit, things like that. And those, rather than fearing them, it would just be a matter of making smart choices because, for example, we're all at risk of high blood pressure, and especially for many people after cancer treatment, those treatments can make you even more at risk. So limiting sodium is important, but that doesn't mean that you need to avoid those foods. And what's really interesting is that as this work on ultra processed foods, which is a specific category that goes beyond that to including processing that you couldn't do in the home, just like you could can, vegetables at home. The ultra processed foods are foods you couldn't make at home. They tend to be associated with increased weight and weight gain. There are studies showing that high consumption is linked with heart disease, with increased cancer risk. So that definitely is a concern, but there are a few things to keep in mind here. One is that including all ultra-processed foods together in one bucket is really not consistent. It doesn't make sense. And what the most recent studies have been looking at is instead of just doing that broad sweep, looking at, well, what about which categories of ultra-processed foods? And so when we really look at these population studies, the people who are consuming high amounts of ultra-processed foods are not consuming high amounts of soy milk and breakfast cereal and yogurt. They're eating high amounts of French fries and soft drinks and chips and snack foods. So let's not, put them all in one bucket. And most recently, they found that, in fact, when we divvy it out, it's the people who are, it's the large consumption of those sweets and low nutrient snack foods and things like that, that is what's really related to health issues.
Mhm.
And I think that is most important. And then secondly, it's not all or nothing. Of course, I would love for you to eat all, fresh, fresh frozen foods with zero ultra processed foods. But when you get that in your mind, I can't have anything. There are times, especially during cancer treatment and recovery, where you just don't have the energy. It's really challenging. And in these studies, the people who are eating the high amounts that are associated with risk are eating maybe 6 or 7 servings a day. The low consumers that are at lower risk of health may still be consuming 1 or 2 ultra processed foods a day. So it's again, we get this all or nothing rule in our head. And so what I would encourage you to do is to look at the whole diet of what you're eating, cut back on the things that are really encouraging you to overeat. They might be ultra palatable. They may not contribute any nutrient value. They may be providing extra calories that make it harder to maintain healthy weight or send insulin levels and blood sugar levels circulating. Cut back on those. And if there are some that actually help you to eat an overall healthy, plant-forward diet, then don't be afraid of them just based on that definition.
I think leaning into, what makes something attainable is important. So thank you for
Yeah, it just
that.
doesn't make sense to include, soy milk and veggie burgers in the same category with French fries, cookies, and soda. When you stop
Right.
and think about it, you know that.
Yeah. Two different things, two different things. Well, with, some of the ultra processed foods and, that kind of discussion and some of those added calories, a big question we get in our community and a big question I have seen also that came in advance and in the chat today, is just on sugar and cancer. So, I'm sure you've heard this question many times as well, but I would love to hear kind of your thoughts. I know we hear a lot, maybe online sugar feeds cancer, and what is your response to that?
Yeah, that we certainly do hear that a lot. And that is really a misinterpretation. First of all cells in our body, cancer cells and healthy cells, are fueled by blood sugar. And blood sugar doesn't just come from eating sugar. Blood sugar comes from all carbohydrate as it's digested. And if you aren't consuming any, you die without blood sugar. So your body is automatically equipped to break down amino acids from protein to form blood sugar. What we know is certainly that diets high in sugar, high in added sugars, not fruit and things like that, but high in added sugars are associated with increased risk of weight gain. And for many aspects of health, risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, and risk of several different types of cancer, extra weight, especially visceral fat inside the abdomen, weight gain, increased waist circumference, does pose a risk of cancer because it leads to inflammation and it leads to insulin resistance. So, of course, it makes sense to cut down on excess added sugars. It leaves room for all these healthy foods that we were talking about that have the dietary fiber and the protective phytochemicals, and it makes it much easier to control weight. But the concept that any sugar consumption, even added sugars, are somehow going directly mainlining their way to cancer cells and fueling their growth is not supported by research.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that hopefully clears up a lot of questions, in people's minds, which I also think ties perfectly into the question and the thought, there is so much information on the internet. I usually say it's a blessing and a curse because there's just so much information out there. It's frustrating when headlines conflict with each other and you're trying to figure out the correct information. How would you say in scenarios like this, when we're unsure about something like sugar or we have these questions, how do we know who to trust?
That is such an important point. And it's very challenging because right now, wherever you are, whether it's on TV or social media or just opening up the internet, this information sort of bombards you. And just recognize, stop and think, these are businesses selling clicks to get you to click, even if they're not selling a book or a product. The way they post the headline is to get you to click there, to be controversial, to have you worried or scared. And we would never take advice-based recommendations on individual studies. It's always important to science advances one bit at a time, looking at how studies support the findings of one study, support or fit with other studies and other types of studies. And so that said, when you see headlines about a study, the more you can just sort of close your eyes and walk away, I think the better off you are. And we were talking before we started today, and Aubrey and I were noting, once you see something, it's hard to unsee it. It sticks in your mind, and there's kind of that residual fear that you wonder about. Instead, when you want to know about something, or if you do see a headline and you want to know how does this fit in overall research, just go straight to an expert source that does look at all the research, put it in context, evaluate the quality of the research. So just go straight to, for example, the website of the American Institute for Cancer Research, AICR.org. Go to the American Cancer Society website. Go to one of the NIH, National Institutes of Health website, like NCI is the cancer group, and there are many other institutes within that NIH site. ask the dietitians at Unite for Her about sources that they would recommend. There is a lot of opportunity for solid, well-reviewed information. But I think that's the difference, is go to the trusted source rather than just randomly taking what happens to come your way.
Yeah. I think that's great. The advice to just kind of, you see it and then you're bringing it to a trusted source or finding more information, from all of those resources you shared. They're phenomenal places to pull and find information. And as Karen mentioned, we're here as your dietitian team to always answer questions as well. I always say, even if I don't know the information, I'm happy to find a reputable source for that information for you as well.
Absolutely. Most of us just aren't equipped to look at an individual study and evaluate, oh, did they adjust for other influences, what we call confounders that might have influenced that result? Did they measure this accurately? All the things that a scientist would look at and evaluate a study, that's what it really takes. And just reading the summary of it, or even unless you are trained in science, even yourself trying to make your way through a research study is challenging.
Mhm. Exactly. There's just so much information to decipher. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, especially kind of your resources, even, like your own website, things that break things down, making that nutrition doable and understandable is so, so important.
Yeah, and that is why I have my website, as well as working for the AICR website, is that we need help to make sense of the research.
Exactly. Well, on the research too, I would be remiss if I didn't pull back in some of our other food groups in our plant foods. I know we touched on fruits and vegetables, and then we kind of started a little bit of a different conversation, but I want to circle back to starting to think about some of our other plant foods. What about whole grains? I know you were talking about some of the compounds in whole grains versus maybe a refined grain. What's the recommendation for us on consuming whole grains?
Whole grains are such a valuable part of this plant-forward kind of dietary patterns. It's the strongest evidence is for their role in reducing risk of colorectal cancer. They may also reduce the risk of weight gain and obesity, which is kind of funny in that for many people who, if they're afraid of them, it's like, oh, they could be fattening. But the evidence shows just the opposite. So AICR's recommendation is to include whole grains in most meals. Um, and it's possible that whole grains could also play a role in reducing risk of other cancers. So it's not just a colon cancer piece, but that is where the evidence is strongest. And they're not just about dietary fiber. These whole grains have a whole range of phytochemical polyphenol compounds that can be anti-inflammatory and influence cell signaling pathways for the good.
Great. So we're not just getting that gut healthy fiber, we're getting even more from our whole
Yes,
grains.
exactly. Yes, fiber plus.
Great. Well, on fiber too, what's the research show about dietary fiber and strategies for a healthy gut microbiome? I feel like I hear so much about gut health and your microbiome. I'd love to hear what you think about some strategies to employ.
Yeah, the microbiome is really a soaring area of interest right now. And there are really two separate aspects here. So I'm going to answer your question in two parts, Aubrey. In terms of dietary fiber itself, it's not only acting through the microbiome. So dietary fiber is strongly linked to lower risk of colorectal cancer. And it's not 100% clear, but there is some evidence that diets higher in dietary fiber could reduce risk of breast cancer. Among breast cancer survivors, that AICR WCRF Cup Global report found lower risk of death from all causes, limited suggestive evidence. So if it were only based on that, that wouldn't be strong enough to support a recommendation. But the fact that it has so many benefits for all aspects of health, we certainly do encourage that. Um, in terms of the fiber's role, one of the things I would love for people to start to grab on is fiber is not just one thing. It's not one nutrient. there are multiple different types of fiber, and each of them offer different types of benefits. So there's some types of fiber called viscous fiber, and that is fiber that is helpful for reducing LDL cholesterol. It tends to slow the blood sugar rise after meals, which means it can help to maintain normal levels of insulin. And it may actually help to control circulating levels of estrogen also, because this is the type of fiber that sort of ties things up in the gut, and by tying up estrogen there, ultimately it can lower circulating levels. That's limited evidence. The stronger evidence is for LDL and blood sugar and insulin resistance. Now, there's a completely different type of fiber called fermentable fiber. This is the type of fiber that the gut microbes use, the bacteria and other microbes in the gut, to create compounds called short-chain fatty acids that seem to protect the colon cells, but also seem to have anti-inflammatory effects, not only in the gut, but released throughout the body. And then the third type of dietary fiber we would call bulking fiber or insoluble fiber. This is the kind of fiber like wheat bran and things like that, that make stools softer and easier to pass and help deal with constipation. So the point of all that is not for you to, it's not, these types aren't labeled on labels, especially that you might see soluble and insoluble, but you won't see viscous and fermentable.
Mm-hmm.
So the message isn't to get super anxious and about all, how much is in each food, but to recognize that different types of foods provide these different types of fiber. You'll get viscous fiber from oatmeal, from barley, so some grains, but not all of them, from fruits and vegetables, from dry beans, peas and lentils, pulses, chia seeds, flax seeds. You get fermentable fiber from certain other vegetables, also from the pulses, and you'll get the insoluble fiber, as I said, from whole wheat and rye, from some vegetables, and a combination of other foods. So the message is just, don't think you're solving the problem. Most of us need much more fiber in our diet.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think you're going to solve it by just taking one fiber supplement and that's got you covered. It's not just the total that counts. It's getting the variety of these sources so that you're getting the variety of benefits. And sometimes it's very hard to differentiate a diet that's high in fiber, how much of the protection is from the fiber alone, and how much is from the fact that these fiber-rich foods are coming with a whole range of protective nutrients and phytochemicals. You get the whole package, and that's what's important.
Yeah, that again, I think just zooming out on that bigger picture, you get the whole package from all these fiber-rich foods.
Exactly.
And some of those, fiber-rich foods, I know you touched on pulses, which are beans and lentils and other legumes. And you were mentioning how with these fiber-rich foods, we oftentimes get a lot of other benefits. And so protein is a big question too. With pulses and legumes, is it mostly just that fiber and that protein? That's the benefit we're getting from consuming those foods?
Well, it certainly helps, because if you're making a more plant-focused eating pattern and you want to make sure you're getting enough protein, then it's not just eating only vegetables. You need some foods that contain more protein, and pulses are a great source to do that. They're a great source of these protective types of fibers, but they also provide a whole range of their own unique phytochemicals that may offer some protective benefits, anti-inflammatory effects, and so forth. So once again, we tend to focus on these individual components and nutrients. It's interesting, it's fascinating science. But the bottom line is, when it comes to benefiting our health, it's the whole package that these foods provide.
Yeah, definitely thinking about getting in that variety, getting in, all of the different, types of plant foods as well. And I think, especially receiving a diagnosis such as this, receiving a cancer diagnosis, sometimes it feels like a big ask or a big shift to totally reshape the diet. And so, do you have any kind of final recommendations or parting thoughts to leave folks with as far as, if we're thinking about what to do to get started eating more plant based, more plant forward, because we know all these benefits, what are some first steps that you could recommend?
Well, I think focusing on that big picture and seeing the, shifting so that those plant foods are the largest part of the plate. And it doesn't mean making your plate bigger, it means making swaps. So even if you say want to continue eating meat, just make those meat portions smaller and add some pulses in a stew or soup or casserole or something like that, to replace some of the meat. If you've been eating mainly refined grain in a dish, maybe make that portion smaller and include a mix of whole grain and refined grain, or increase the amount of vegetables. You can keep the same basic flavor profile that you love in dishes, just by making those small swaps. And bit by bit, you get there, and your tastes also adjust, and you get more comfortable in the kitchen, and it doesn't always stay as complicated or hard as it may seem. And I know that's part of what you all at Unite for Her provide, is showing people how to prepare those foods that are, easier and so forth. And so I think, just limiting the meat products and making more room for those plant foods.
Yeah, just adding some space on that plate, adding a little bit. And so with all of these recommendations, we're often talking to people about their grocery shopping habits and heading to the store and things of that nature. So I just wanted to ask if you had any resources. I know you gave us so many resources on finding information. Do you have any resources for folks as they are headed to the grocery store and, making some of these choices at the store? If you've had any connections, I'm happy to provide some as well. But if you know of any, really helpful tips or tricks or apps that have helped folks.
That's a good question. The apps, there are some good ones out there. I don't have any coming right top of mind, but I do think that exploring the AICR website, aicr.org, there are just so many resources. One that you might want to check out for some of these kind of basic concepts of how you shift the proportions on your plate is a concept AICR calls the New American Plate, and how to gradually transition your plate. And there's a section on the AICR website that includes that. If you feel like you'd like some help, even to complement what you get from Unite for Her, there is a Healthy 10 Challenge AICR has, which is a free program online that helps you break down steps one by one into working in this. And I think as part of that, you may find help in figuring out both menu planning and grocery shopping and things like that.
Great. Thank you. And yes, as you mentioned, we are here at Unite for Her to help you out as well. There are lots and lots of resources on our website as far as tips for grocery shopping. We're happy to help you navigate individually as well. I do want to highlight, I did get a lot of questions in the chat about specific foods and specific choices, which product versus this product. And that's what we're here to help you support and make those choices. And so definitely reach out to us here at Unite for Her, your culinary dietitian team, so we can help answer any of those unanswered questions or any of those specific questions that may be pertinent to you individually. And I just wanted to thank you so much, Karen, for hopping on today to highlight some of these amazing benefits of plants and really dispel some of the things that we maybe hear that sometimes cloud our judgment. So we so appreciate you coming on for our Ask the Experts today.
It was my pleasure to be with you.
Great. And thank you again to our digital education sponsors, West and Merck, with additional support from Daiichi Sankyo and GSK. And we look forward to seeing everybody at our next educational events. As a reminder, we are just wrapping up Plantuary. So as we are talking about eating more plant foods, be sure to check out our website, uniteforher.org/plantuary. Sign up for our Plantuary pledge and to get more ideas on how you can incorporate more plant foods into your day. All right, everybody, have a wonderful afternoon, and we will talk to you soon.